I've been wanting to write this for a while, but kept chickening out. Every time I opened a new post, I'd stare at the blank box and close the tab. But here we are, I'm doing it. This is my experience dating a femboy, told from the perspective of a girl who had absolutely no idea what she was getting into and is now completely, embarrassingly obsessed with her person. Let me start from the beginning. I met Milo, not his real name. I asked him if I could share, and he said only if you make me sound cute, so pressure's on. About 14 months ago, through a mutual friend at a pretty low-key house party. I noticed him immediately, but not for the reason you might think. It wasn't the skirt, although yes, he was wearing one. It wasn't the soft blush on his cheeks, or the way his lashes were just a little too perfect to be natural. It was the way he was arguing passionately about a specific pasta sauce brand with someone twice his size and completely refusing to back down. He had this energy of someone who was utterly comfortable taking up space in whatever way felt right to him, and I found that immediately magnetic. We talked for like 4 hours that night. He sat cross-legged on the couch next to me, and we just talked about everything. He told me he was a graphic design student. He told me he'd been doing ballet until he was 17 and quit because of an injury and still kind of grieved it. He showed me his nail art, little crescent moons on each finger done freehand. And when I said I was impressed, he just shrugged like, yeah, it took me about a year to get consistent. Not bragging, just stating a fact. I drove home that night thinking about him for the entire 40-minute ride. We started texting, slowly at first, and then the way it goes when you're actually into someone constantly, until your phone is basically just a Milo communication device. He sent me pictures of outfits he was considering. He asked my opinion on color combinations. He sent me voice notes when he was too lazy to type, and his voice is this low, calm thing that felt completely incongruous with the tiny pastel aesthetic he had going on. And somehow that contrast made me even more into him. I asked him out about 3 weeks in. He said yes immediately, and then sent me a 17-message string of outfit ideas for the date, asking which vibe I was going for so he could coordinate. I didn't know we were doing coordination, but apparently we were doing coordination. Okay, so let me talk about the actual relationship stuff because I think this is what people are actually curious about, and I want to be honest. The first thing I want to say is that dating Milo made me realize how many assumptions I had built into my idea of what a relationship was supposed to look like, and I hadn't even known those assumptions were there. I thought I was pretty open-minded. I thought I didn't have a rigid script for how things went. I was wrong. Not in a bad way, in a genuinely illuminating way. He just sort of quietly dismantled a bunch of things I didn't know I was holding on to. For example, the first time he cried in front of me. We had been together maybe 2 months and we watched a movie. I won't say which one because it's embarrassing how sad it is. And he just cried openly without any of that thing where you can tell someone is fighting it and trying to hold it together to seem like they're fine. He just cried and then looked at me with his eyes all red and said that was devastating and went to get a glass of water. And I realized I was the one sitting there with my chest tight, refusing to let myself cry, which is a habit I apparently have, and it was the first time I'd ever noticed it. He talks about his feelings with this kind of directness that I initially found almost alarming, not in a confrontational way, in a I feel a little anxious about this thing and I just wanted to name it way. He says that stuff out loud and then moves on. He doesn't make it a big production. He just says it. And slowly I started doing that too, and our relationship has been better for it in ways I'm still discovering. He is also, for the record, incredibly funny. This is something I don't think people expect when they picture a femboy. They picture soft and sweet and gentle, which Milo is, but he's also wickedly dry and will absolutely roast you with a completely straight face. We have this bit we do where he makes these extremely formal complaints about minor inconveniences using very elaborate vocabulary, and I respond as if I'm a customer service representative. We did it for 20 minutes in a grocery store once, and the person in line behind us was visibly confused and delighted. Now, let me talk about the stuff that was actually an adjustment, because I want to be real about this. The bathroom situation took some getting used to. I am not a high maintenance person in terms of beauty routine. I wash my face, I put on moisturizer. Occasionally, I remember to use the eye cream my mom bought me. Milo has a skincare routine that is conservatively 12 steps. He knows what every single product does. He has explained them to me. I have retained approximately none of this information, but I've started actually using sunscreen every day because of him, and my skin has never looked better, so. The closet? Oh, the closet. He has more clothes than I do. He has more clothes than I do, and they are better organized than mine, and they take up more space. We negotiated this. We are still occasionally negotiating this. He is very good at making sad eyes when I suggest maybe we don't need all of the cardigans, and I am extremely susceptible to the sad eyes, so the cardigans remain. There were also some moments early on where I wasn't sure how to handle things in public. Not because I was embarrassed, I want to be really clear about that, but because I was hyper aware in a way I hadn't expected. When we walked around together and I could see people clocking him, looking twice, I had this whole internal experience of wanting to form a human shield around him while also knowing he absolutely did not need or want a human shield because he's been navigating this his whole life and I had been navigating it for like 6 weeks. He's the expert here. I had to learn to take my cues from him and not project my own anxiety onto situations that he had already long since made his peace with. One time someone made a comment, not a terrible comment, more of a surprised and poorly filtered comment, and I started to get that hot face thing where you're about to say something and Milo just looked at the person with this very calm, very flat expression, and then looked away and kept talking to me, and it was over. The person looked embarrassed. Milo had moved on. I was still vibrating slightly, and he put his hand on mine and said, "You don't have to do anything. I'm okay." And I realized that I had been doing that thing again where I was making his experience about my reaction to his experience. That was a lesson I kept having to learn, actually. Not to center myself in things that were about him. Here's what people don't tell you about dating someone who expresses themselves differently than the norm expects. You end up doing a lot of looking at yourself. Because everything that surprises you, or confuses you, or makes you uncertain, that's not him, that's you, and your expectations, and the scripts you absorbed without realizing it. He's just being himself. The work is yours. And that work has been, honestly, some of the most valuable work I've done. Now for the part I love most, because I've been talking about the adjustment stuff, and I want to make sure I also talk about why I am completely gone for this person. He notices things. Small things. He remembered on our 6th date that I had mentioned my favorite childhood book in passing on our 2nd date, and he found a copy at a second-hand store and put it on my desk without saying anything, and when I texted him about it, he just sent back a little crescent moon emoji. He does things like that constantly. He just pays attention. He makes things beautiful. Our apartment, we moved in together 7 months ago, which, yes, very fast, we know, we've heard it, looks like someone who actually thought about how spaces feel. There are plants that are still alive because he remembers to water them. There are candles that smell like something real. There are little things on shelves that each have a story. I grew up in a house where aesthetic was not really a consideration, and I had never lived anywhere that felt curated before, and it turns out it makes a genuinely significant difference to your daily experience to be in a space that someone loved into existence. He is patient in a way that I have started to think is one of the rarest things. Not passive, he will absolutely tell you when something isn't working for him, but patient. He doesn't rush to fill silences. He lets things be complicated for as long as they need to be complicated. When I'm stressed, he doesn't immediately try to solve it. He asks if I want help or if I want company, and then he does whichever one I say. We cook together on Sundays. He's better at it than I am, and he teaches me things without making me feel like a student, which is a skill I did not know existed until I experienced it. He makes this pasta. It's from a recipe his grandmother taught him, and it's genuinely the best thing I eat on a regular basis. And he puts on music that ranges from extremely melancholy indie to completely unhinged pop, depending on what mood he's in. And I do prep work and drink wine, and sometimes I look at him in the kitchen and think about how I almost talked myself out of texting him back that first week because I was nervous. I'm so glad I texted him back. I want to say something to anyone who might be reading this, who is in the early stages of figuring out if they could date someone like Milo, or who is curious about it, or who is just looking for some kind of reflection of a relationship that looks different from the standard template. It's not complicated in the ways you might think it is. The complicated parts are the universal relationship parts: communicating, showing up, navigating differences, learning someone else's rhythms. None of that is specific to Milo being a femboy. The specific parts are actually mostly just interesting. You learn things about yourself, you examine assumptions you didn't know you had. You realize that softness is not weakness and that aesthetic choices are genuinely a form of self-expression, and that the people who have had to be the most intentional about who they are usually make the most interesting people to know. Also, you just get to be with someone who has a genuinely incredible sense of personal style and will occasionally let you borrow his lip gloss, and that's just a bonus. Milo read a draft of this before I posted it. He made me change two things and then said, okay, this is actually really nice, and went back to whatever he was doing. He is right that it's nice, I think. I hope it is, anyway. That's our story, for now. 14 months in, and I still get a little stupid happy when he texts me. I think that's probably the best thing I can say about any relationship. TLDR, fell for a guy at a party who was arguing about pasta sauce and wearing a skirt and doing it with complete confidence. Moved in together 7 months ago. Bathroom has 12 skincare steps. Closet negotiations ongoing. Would absolutely do it all again.